Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you can find stuff possibly unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group and very friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Welcome back. We continue the story of my time with the Krays. They were crazy days. My name is Albert Donoghue. I was chief growler and rent collector for Ronnie and Reggie right up to 1968, when we were all arrested by Nipper Reed and his Scotland Yard team. Boxer Billy was a good little fighter who was one of Ronnie's prospects, but he upset Ronnie, and so Ronnie just did him. Billy called into the pub one night and Ronnie didn't talk to him. He just pulled out this Gurkha knife and did him with it. Billy was paralyzed with fear. He couldn't move, and Ronnie just cut the kid to pieces. Billy was still alive, but we just had to wrap the guy up, dump him on the steps of London Hospital and go away. That affair was obviously over. Ronnie used to get through boys like hotcakes. You'd see them come in, but at the end of the night, you'd go your way, and he'd go his. You never saw what was going on, but for sure, Ronnie worked himself into a fearful passion over these young blokes. People who were on the firm before I joined told the story of what happened once when they were in some pub with Ronnie and his latest swain. Apparently, Ronnie broke down while he was telling this kid how much he loved him. Ronnie was crying as he took a knife out and ran it through his own hand to show this boy, "Look, that's how much I love you." The cut left a permanent scar on his left hand. That shows how much he thought he loved the boy. It shows even better how potty the man was too. At the same time, Ronnie was socializing with high-class queers. He got involved with a lot of well-connected males. There were writers, budding stars, and famous politicians like Lord Boothby, Tom Dryburgh, and a few others. There were also several solicitors. These were all known homosexuals, and it was nothing unusual to see them in Ronnie's company. You might think it odd that there should ever have been a relationship between Ronnie and Lord Boothby, especially when, as we know, there are agencies who try and keep our great and good on the straight and narrow, away from scum like Ronnie. But boys will be boys, especially Tory politicians with a taste for rough trade. That big business about the Sunday Mirror having a photo of the peer and the gangster was just about over by the time I joined the firm. Boothby sued and got a fortune from the Mirror, £40,000. All Ronnie got was an apology, but even this meant that Fleet Street didn't dare do any more exposés of the twins for years. I'm sure there was something more to the affair. Ronnie didn't spend all that time with Boothby just for the pleasure of his company, and certainly not for some lunatic development scheme in Nigeria. They were sharing low-class boy lovers. Ronnie's preoccupation with violence was weird. Not only did he enjoy inflicting it, but he also used to love hearing stories about other people's violence. If someone was telling him about a real incident in which violence had occurred, Ronnie would get them to sit down and give that stuff to him again and again, detail by detail. He got something out of it. He was definitely a Freddy Krueger type. Ronnie would get a deep pleasure out of smashing somebody. He would literally smash a person with whatever he had in his hand. It didn't matter if it were a hammer, a bayonet, or an axe. He would just slice somebody for the wrong word and enjoy it and say, "Hold that," and walk away. That's different from what we might have had to do from time to time in the course of our normal activities as a gangster. Quite often, you can be sent to give someone a slap. You've got no personal problem with him. You might not have even met the guy before, but the twins just say, "Listen, go over to so-and-so's warehouse. We've asked him for this money. He ain't come out with it, give him a slap." So you go and give him a slap. There's no personal anger in it. You're getting paid for it. That's professional violence. But for you to react with violence of Ronnie's ferocity, you've got to feel someone has insulted you to your very core. Or, of course, they've just whacked you. With some people, this kind of thing can get to a stage where they do it purely as a way of life. Lay the man down, break his leg when you'd never met him before and you're not even angry with him, and he has never done you any bad turn. But to do what Ronnie did on a regular basis, that was something beyond belief. Dickie Morgan, who had joined the firm before me, used to tell me a story about when he was locked up with the twins in the Army Nick around 1953, waiting to go to military prison for repeated assault and desertion during national service. He said they kidded the corporal on guard into the communal cell and beat the shit out of him. Then they all held him down while Ronnie masturbated him. So that is weird, yeah? So he obviously got something out of that. And in a heterosexual encounter, that would be the equivalent of violent rape. And how bizarre that a man who was incapable of accepting any military discipline should rejoice in a nickname, the Colonel. When I was on the firm, we all knew Ronnie was a certifiable case. He was mad by any reckoning, according to any school or theory of psychiatry, and he ought to have been locked up years beforehand, for his own safety as well as other people's. If you went to Fort Valence, you would see him sitting in the armchair, and he'd be chain smoking and popping these heavy pills, and he'd be scowling. He used to scowl a lot. Ronnie's favourite pills were downers called Stematol. They were really high-powered tranquilizers, and his main supplier was this Dr. Blasker. I think Ronnie latched onto him because he was Ronnie Bender's local doctor over Millwall Way on the Isle of Dogs. If he looked like running out, or if he was going to go away for the weekend, he would tell Bender, nip over to see Blasker, give him a tenner, take him a bottle of whiskey and get my prescription. I think it was Blasker who first came up with the idea that Stematol was just what the Colonel needed. Alcohol was just what the doctor needed too. Blasker was an alcoholic and a compulsive gambler. He would give you a prescription for anything, he'd sew you up, and he'd come whenever the firm gave him a call. Then he'd be given a bottle of whiskey and a tenner, and he'd be quite happy, placing a bet or having a game of rummy or kaluki. He was a chubby little man, with a rosy face but scruffy appearance, like a character out of Dickens. He had the bluffness of a real colonel. "Oh yes, my boy. Yes, yes, very well." I used to have to drag him out of the Green Dragon, where he'd be gambling with George Meisel and One-Armed Lou. I'd say, "Finish your hand, Doc. We need you." He was lucky if he could keep his hand still long enough to identify the cards. And this was the man treating our beloved Führer. No wonder Ronnie's behaviour was so dangerously unpredictable. If there was a general conversation going on, but Ronnie wanted to listen to one particular person, he'd say, "Shut up, you," and then you knew it was time to shut up. Everything depended on his moods. If you were close, as I was, you could say to him one day, "Time to go down the caravan, Ronnie. You look like you're putting on a bit of weight." Now that would be okay. But you could say exactly the same thing tomorrow, and you would have to fight for your life. He would attack you with whatever was handy. That was what happened to an old friend who jokingly told Ron he was looking fatter. Ron cut him up so badly the guy needed 70 stitches just in his face. We called him Tramlines after that. That was a regular thing for Ronnie. It was just whatever shape his head was in. The man was a psycho walking around with deadly weapons in his pockets. Reactionary social commentators might say we should have all been put down. According to a straight person's way of thinking, we probably should have been. But for sure, he had to be first in line for the stun gun. Ronnie also used to have manifestations. He would take on religions. He would become a Buddhist for about 3 weeks, till he found out how awkward it was to live life as a Buddhist. Then he'd turn that in. And then he would become Jewish, and then he'd hear something about a visionary Christian thinker like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and adopt him as a role model for 5 minutes. There was always stuff like that going down. A good sign that he was going into one, as we called it, going into a depression, was when he started playing his Winston Churchill records. He had an LP of Churchill's speeches, which for me has got to be the most boring thing I've ever heard. I thought so then, but I think so even more now, especially now it's been shown that it's not Churchill's voice on half the speeches, but some actor pretending to be him. Ronnie used to sit and listen to every word of this, so you knew he was going into one. The guy was just on his own planet. Ronnie also used to hear voices. I'm sure this much was genuine, but when he knew that other people knew he used to hear voices, he would often fake it to intimidate people. He could say to someone, "You went to so-and-so, didn't you?" "How did you know?" "I know these things. I hear these little things." And the person would go, "Oh." And he might go away believing that Ronnie had picked the information up through some psychic power. So he was a bit clever. He had an instinctive cunning, a natural guile. If he'd had some education, he could have been one of the great dictators. Ronnie must have inherited his preoccupation with the mystic and supernatural because the whole Kray family was into this psychic thing. I think they half took a shine to me because I was born under the sign of the Scorpio, same as the twins. To them that was important. Now I had heard something once where there was supposed to be a ghost of a long-dead uncle in the Valence Roadhouse. Well, for some reason I was sleeping there one night, and when I woke up in the morning, I came down, and Mrs. Kray said something like, "Here's your breakfast. Have your cup of tea." Aunt May was in from next door. She was the main clairvoyant. So they're all sitting there, and I said, hesitating, "Did anyone come in last night?" And they said, "No, what?" So I said, "Well, there's this little old boy with a shirt on with no collar." I was describing the old collarless shirts to which you can attach clean collars instead of washing the entire shirt. He had braces and baggy trousers. I saw him, and everybody stopped and looked at me because I've just described what's supposed to be the resident ghost. Except I've made up the entire story as a joke. Then I realised that I've gone a bit too far now. I've got to carry on with it. I can't laugh because they might all have jumped up and hit me, but I had to carry it through now. So I say, "Yeah, I saw him. I just saw the guy." And they all looked at each other, and they looked at me. And they were all firmly convinced it had actually happened. Ronnie believed it too. It's said that when he went into Broadmoor, he was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, which is what they do with someone who hears people giving him instructions. Well, I don't know what instructions Ronnie had when I was working for him, but in the long run, they didn't do him a lot of good. If any of us members of the firm might have been tempted to follow Ron as a visionary religious leader, complete with voices, we'd all have been put off by another side of his wonky personality. He'd often behave like a little boy and sit around giggling. Somebody might fart. He, you'd hear Ronnie giggling. And he'd giggle for the next half hour. Over a fart. Okay, there are times when anyone might make a crack about someone farting, but you wouldn't go on giggling uncontrollably. There was one occasion while Ronnie was in hiding when he and Big Pat Connolly held a farting competition. Can you imagine it? There's this top hoodlum, a friend of peers and MPs, and this huge, fat, scar-faced, guttural Glaswegian who weighs 20 stone, sitting there giggling over a farting competition. People often ask me which twin was the more dominant one. That depended on moods. Sometimes they would scream and fight and slag each other off. They would get into proper fist fights, but sometimes Reggie would blaze back at Ronnie, and Ronnie would sit there and take it. Sometimes it was the other way round. Piggy in the middle was Charlie. He always got a slagging from the pair of them. When the twins had fights together, they would be screaming, rolling around on the floor, but although they were capable guys, they'd both been professional boxers, there was always a certain restraint. You know how it is, two brothers can be really angry with each other, but somehow they instinctively hold off, they don't go the full way. Well, these two would hold their punches, but they'd still make each other bleed and give each other black eyes. When these guys knocked each other up, we wouldn't interfere. You didn't interfere with them two. That would be like trying to separate a couple of fierce Doberman dogs. They'd both turn on you. So you waited till they were flagging out, then you would interrupt and say, "Somebody's coming up the stairs," something like that, and break it up that way. We had to stop them once because Ronnie was showing some serious marks, and he had a big meeting with some Yanks the following week. These were serious people, representatives of the mafia, and the only way we could part the twins was by saying, "You don't want to meet the Yanks looking like that." Normally, we wouldn't interfere. We'd let them carry on. These brawls usually took place in a pub where we had control over the landlord. It was usually after closing time, and we'd be upstairs or in a back room. But the fights would also break out in a house or a flat. They were always at it. We just let them knock it out of each other. If they don't take it out on each other, they're going to take it out on one of the teams, so just stand back and watch the show. Sell peanuts. Apart from these fraternal rumpuses, Reggie's violence was different from Ronnie's. It was also unhinged, but when Reggie lashed out, it was nearly always over some perceived slight on his gangland status. So we might be in a bar or at a party, and Reggie might say something. Then somebody else might say, "Oh, shut up. I don't believe that." Well, that cheeky fellow would get a smack in the chin, because no one could be allowed to talk to a boss of the underworld like that. It was just this unpredictable mix. Ronnie's nutty kind of violence, and Reggie's controlled brutality, which made them so dangerous. This is what had got them to the top of the underworld, and what made it so difficult to depose them. As twins, they balanced each other out. Reggie was a lot more logical, but probably more dangerous because of that. He would do the same things as Ronnie, hack people down or shoot them, but he would do it with an end in mind. Not in a wild rage, but for a purpose. I never had straight violence with either one of them. I could have handled Ronnie, I wouldn't have worried about him. You could just say, "You're a poof," and he'd go into such a frenzy that you could pick him off easy. But Reggie was a good, calm fighter. I wouldn't have been able to box him. I wasn't worried about Charlie. In his younger days, he'd been a good fighter too, but now he was too soft and too nice. So this fine pair were our leaders. Hardly inspirational, nothing like Robin Hood, Napoleon or Nelson, not the kind of people you would go over the top and die for. Except that, rather like those poor sods who did die for mad generals in World War I, few of us had any choice. If we refused to do what they wanted, we could have been shot. We could try and ease our way out discreetly, as a few people did. Or we could run off and disappear. Or we could just submit, which was by far the easiest option. Also, to our shame, we saw the twins as our meal ticket. They were the best payers. In fact, where we came from, they were the only game in town. A good family business. That brings us to the end of another episode. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'll see you for the next installment soon.
watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.